A painter's brush strokes blood on a quiet seaside path before a woman drowns. Is it a vision or a clue to murder? Join Miss Marple as she unravels greed, betrayal, and a crimson lie in Rathhole's shadows. Can a canvas reveal a killer?
Chapter 1. The Artist's Vision. The salt-tinged breeze of Rathhole, Cornwall, curled through the open window of Joyce Lepriere's rented cottage, carrying with it the faint cries of gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. Joyce, a painter of 32, with a penchant for capturing the soul of places, had arrived in the village 3 days ago, her easel and canvas in tow, seeking the kind of inspiration that London's smog and clamor could never provide. Rathhole, with its cobbled lanes, whitewashed cottages, and the weathered charm of the seaside inn, promised just that, a muse woven from sea and stone. Yet as she stood before her canvas on this bright September morning in 1925, a chill, unrelated to the breeze, prickled her skin. Her easel was set up on a grassy knoll overlooking the inn, a 3-story building with ivy-clad walls and a sign that creaked in the wind. Joyce had chosen this spot for its view, the inn's facade, the cobblestone path leading to the beach, and the endless stretch of the Atlantic beyond. She dipped her brush into a mix of ochre and white, sketching the inn's weathered shutters with precise strokes. The scene was idyllic, almost too perfect, until her eyes caught movement on the inn's second-floor balcony. A man and a woman stood there, their voices low but their gestures animated. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, the dark hair slicked back, was Dennis Dacre, one half of the couple Joyce had seen at breakfast in the inn's dining room. The woman beside him was not his wife, Marjorie, but a stranger with auburn hair and a silk scarf that fluttered like a flame. Joyce had overheard the innkeeper call her Carol, a guest who'd arrived the previous evening. Dennis leaned close to Carol, his hand brushing her arm, and Joyce felt a twinge of unease. Marjorie, pale and quiet, had seemed so fragile at breakfast, her eyes fixed on her tea while Dennis laughed too loudly at nothing in particular. She shook her head, refocusing on her canvas. She painted the balcony, adding the wet bathing suits draped over its railing, Dennis's navy trunks, Marjorie's green one-piece, and now, curiously, a red suit that must belong to Carol. Her brush moved with purpose, capturing the suit's damp folds glinting in the sunlight. But then, without conscious intent, her hand veered to the cobblestone path below. Crimson streaks bloomed under her brush, pooling across the stones in jagged, violent lines. She froze, her breath catching. Blood. It looked like blood, stark and glistening, as if someone had fallen and bled out right there. She stepped back, her pulse quickening. She hadn't meant to paint that. Her palette held no red. She'd been working with blues, greens, and earth tones. Yet there it was, a vivid stain marring the serene scene. She glanced at the cobblestones in real life, half expecting to see the same horror. The path was clean, of course, its stones worn but unblemished. Joyce laughed, a shaky sound, and wiped her brush on a rag. "Too much coffee," she muttered, though she hadn't touched a cup all morning. Determined to correct her mistake, she mixed a fresh batch of gray to cover the crimson. But as she lifted her brush, a shadow fell across her canvas. "That's a fine painting, miss," said Mr. Tuttle, the innkeeper, squinting at her work. He was a stout man with a fisherman's weathered face and a habit of tugging his cap when nervous. "Though," he added, tilting his head, "those red marks don't quite fit, do they?" Joyce's cheeks warmed. "An accident," she said quickly. "I got carried away." She dabbed gray over the crimson, but the paint seemed to resist, the red bleeding through like a stubborn wound. Mr. Tuttle chuckled. "Artists and their fancies. Reminds me of old Mrs. Penrose, who swore she saw ghosts in her watercolors. Mind you, she drank more than she painted.
Joyce forced a smile. No ghosts here, just a clumsy hand. But as Mr. Tuttle ambled back to the inn, her unease grew. She packed her supplies, her eyes darting to the balcony. Dennis and Carol were gone, but Marjorie now stood there, her hands gripping the railing, staring out at the sea. The green bathing suit swayed beside her, dripping onto the stones below. No blood, Joyce told herself, just water. Back in her cottage, Joyce tried to shake the morning's strangeness. She brewed tea, the kettle's whistle a comforting hum, and sat by the window to sketch the cliffs. But her pencil traced the same cobblestone path, and again crimson lines appeared, curling like veins. She dropped her pencil, her hands trembling. This wasn't imagination. It felt like a warning, as if her mind had seen something her eyes had missed. Needing air, she walked to the village square, where fishermen mended nets and children chased gulls. At the Rusty Anchor, a pub older than the cliffs, she found herself at the bar, sipping a ginger beer. The barmaid, a wiry woman named Elsie with a sharp tongue, noticed Joyce's distracted air. "You look like you've seen a selkie," Elsie said, wiping a glass. "What's got you so pale?" Joyce hesitated, then recounted the morning's incident, the painting, the crimson streaks, and the way they seemed to come from nowhere. Elsie leaned in, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of gossip. "That's a queer thing," she said. "Mind you, Rathole's got its share of odd tales. Ever hear about the girl who drowned at the end 20 years ago? Fishermen said the stones ran red for days, though the tide washed it clean." Joyce's stomach twisted. "Red? Like blood?" Elsie shrugged. "So they say. Never found who did it, or if it was done at all. Could be your paintings picking up on old ghosts." She laughed, but it was hollow, and Joyce sensed she half believed the tale. "Those people at the inn," Joyce said, lowering her voice, "the Dacres and that woman, Carol. Do you know them?" Elsie's eyes narrowed. "The Dacres come every summer. Dennis is all charm, but Marjorie is quiet as a mouse. That Carol, though, she's new. Showed up last night, bold as brass, cozying up to Dennis like they're old friends. Marjorie didn't look pleased, I'll tell you that." Joyce nodded, her mind racing. She packed her drink and stepped outside, the sea air sharp against her face. The story of the drowned girl lingered, its parallel to her vision too uncanny to dismiss. She wandered to the beach, where the tide lapped at pebbles, and watched the horizon. The seaside inn loomed behind her, its balcony now empty. She imagined the crimson streaks again, vivid and accusing, and wondered if they were tied to the Dacres, to Carol, or to something older, buried in Rathole's salt-soaked history. That night, Joyce's sleep was restless. She dreamed of the cobblestone path, but this time the blood wasn't paint. It pulsed and spread, seeping from the stones as if the earth itself were bleeding. A figure stood at the edge of her vision, blurred but familiar, holding a dripping red cloth. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, the room lit by moonlight. The dream felt like a message, urging her to look closer, to see what she had missed. She lit a candle and paced the cottage, her sketchbook open on the table. The crimson lines stared back at her, stark against the gray stones. She didn't believe in ghosts or psychic visions, but she couldn't deny the pull of her own art. Something about the inn, the Dacres, and Carol was wrong, dangerously wrong. She thought of Marjorie's pale face, Dennis's easy laughter, and Carol's sly smile. Her painting had captured more than a scene. It had caught a glimpse of truth. Joyce made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd watch the trio more closely, note their movements, their words. She'd talk to Mr. Tuttle again, perhaps dig into the village's old stories. If her vision was a fluke, she'd prove it. If it wasn't, she'd find out why her brush had painted blood where none existed. For now, she blew out the candle and stared into the dark, the sound of the sea a restless murmur outside her window. The mystery of Rathhole had begun, and Joyce Lempriere, whether by chance or fate, was its unlikely witness.
Chapter 2. Whispers of Rathhole. The morning sun hung low over Rathhole, casting golden flecks across the sea that lapped at the village's pebbled shore. Joyce Lempriere stood at the edge of the beach, her boots sinking into the damp shingle, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The unease from yesterday's painting lingered like a fog, the crimson streaks she'd unwittingly brushed onto her canvas, haunting her thoughts. She'd resolved to watch the Dacres and their mysterious companion, Carol, more closely, determined to unravel whether her vision was a fluke or something more sinister. The seaside inn loomed behind her, its whitewashed walls gleaming, but the cobblestone path, clean and unblemished, seemed to mock her memory of blood. Joyce adjusted her scarf against the brisk September breeze and headed toward the village square, where market stalls were just opening. Fishermen hauled crates of mackerel, their voices mingling with the chatter of women bartering for bread. She needed answers, not just about the Dacres, but about Rathhole itself. Elsie's tale of the drowned girl from 20 years ago had rooted itself in her mind, its echo of her own vision too striking to ignore. She spotted a familiar figure near a stall piled with nets, Tom Pengelly, a grizzled fisherman she'd seen mending ropes outside the rusty anchor. His weathered hands moved with practiced ease, and his eyes, sharp as a gull's, flicked up as she approached. "Morning, Mr. Pengelly," Joyce said, offering a smile. "Mind if I join you? I could use a bit of local wisdom." Tom grunted, tying a knot with a flick of his wrist. "Wisdom's just old stories and salt, miss. What's an artist like you after?" His Cornish accent was thick, but his tone held a cautious warmth. She hesitated, then opened her sketchbook to a blank page, though she didn't draw. "I heard about a drowning years back, near the seaside inn. Elsie at the pub mentioned it, said the stones ran red. Do you know the story?" Tom's hands stilled, his eyes narrowing. "Aye, I know it. Nellie Tregennis, barely 18. Found her in '05, washed up by the cove. Tide brought her in, but no one saw her go under. Some said accident, some said worse." He glanced at the sea, as if it held the truth. "His family swore she was pushed, but no proof. Village hushed it up quick. Bad for visitors, you see." Joyce's pulse quickened. "And the blood on the stones?" Tom shrugged, but his jaw tightened. "Talk, mostly. Fishermen saw stains. Could have been seaweed or fish guts. But folks like a good ghost story." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You're not the first to ask about odd things at that inn. What's got you curious?" She considered telling him about the painting, but thought better of it. Instead, she said, "Just something I overheard. The Dacres and that woman staying with them, Carol, they seem tense." Tom snorted. "Dennis Dacre has a charm that wears thin. Marjorie's a mouse, always has been. As for that Carol, she's got the look of trouble. Saw her yesterday laughing with Dennis on the pier, while Marjorie trailed behind like a shadow." Joyce nodded, filing away his words. She thanked him and wandered toward the beach, where the Dacres and Carol were now visible, setting up for a swim. Dennis, in his navy trunks, tossed a towel onto the sand with a grin, while Carol, in a striking red bathing suit, stretched languidly, her auburn hair catching the light. Marjorie sat apart, her green suit damp from an earlier dip, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Joyce settled on a nearby rock, pretending to sketch the cliffs, but watching the trio closely. Dennis and Carol waded into the shallows, their laughter carrying over the waves. Carol splashed Dennis, who retaliated with a playful dunk, their ease bordering on intimacy. Marjorie's shoulders stiffened, her hands twisting the edge of her towel. Joyce's pencil hovered over her sketchbook, but her mind was elsewhere. The dynamic was clear. Dennis and Carol shared a spark, while Marjorie was an outsider in her own marriage. Was this tension that her painting had sensed, or was it something darker? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement. Carol slipped on a slick rock, and Dennis caught her, their faces close for a moment too long. Marjorie stood abruptly, her towel falling to the sand, and walked toward the water. Joyce expected her to join them, but Marjorie veered left toward a rocky outcrop where the tide churned fiercely. She disappeared behind a boulder, and Joyce's breath caught. The image of crimson streaks flashed in her mind, unbidden. She stood, ready to follow, when a voice called out, "Miss Lempriere, is it?" A woman approached, her gray hair pinned neatly under a wide-brimmed hat. It was Mrs. Penhale, the village postmistress, who delivered a litter to Joyce's cottage yesterday. "You're out early, sketching the sea." Joyce forced a smile, glancing toward the outcrop, trying to capture the light. "Do you know the Dacres well? They seem an interesting group." Mrs. Penhale's lips pursed. "I know everyone who passes through. Dennis is all smiles, but Marjorie, she's not been herself this trip. And that Carol turned up out of nowhere, calling herself a friend. I saw them at the inn's tea yesterday, and Marjorie barely spoke. Looked like she'd rather be anywhere else." Joyce nodded, her eyes scanning for Marjorie. "Did you ever hear about a drowning here, years ago? A girl named Melly?" Mrs. Penhale's face tightened. "Oh, aye. Sad business. Nellie was my cousin's friend, always swimming where she shouldn't. Some said a lad was involved, but no one named him. The inn was new then, and the owner didn't want scandal." She lowered her voice. "You be careful poking into old stories. Rathhole has a long memory." Before Joyce could reply, Marjorie reappeared, her face pale but composed, her suit dripping. She rejoined the group, and Dennis barely glanced at her, his attention on Carol's animated story. Joyce thanked Mrs. Penhale and returned to her rock, her sketchbook forgotten. The morning's conversation swirled in her mind. Tom's tale of Nellie, Mrs. Penhale's warnings, the Dacres' fractured dynamic. Her vision of blood felt less like a mistake and more like a puzzle piece. Back at her cottage, she spread her canvas on the table, the seaside inn's facade staring back at her. She'd covered the crimson streaks with gray, but their shadow lingered, a faint blush beneath the paint. She tried to sketch again, this time a simple wave, but her brush dipped into red without her realizing. A single streak slashed across the canvas, jagged and raw, like a wound on the sea. She dropped the brush, her hands shaking. This wasn't imagination, it was insistence, her art demanding she see something she'd overlooked. Desperate for clarity, she walked to the village's tiny library, a stone building tucked behind the church. The librarian, a spectacled man named Mr. Vey, greeted her with a nod. "Looking for something specific, miss?" "Old newspapers," Joyce said. "Around 1905. Anything about a drowning?" Mr. Vey raised an eyebrow, but led her to a dusty archive. After an hour of flipping through brittle pages, she found it, a brief article in the Cornish Gazette, dated July 1905. "Local girl lost to sea. Nellie Tregennis, found dead near the seaside inn, cause unknown. No mention of blood, but a line caught Joyce's eye. Witnesses reported seeing a man near the cove that night, unidentified." The article was curt, as if the village had wanted the story buried. Joyce closed the paper, her mind racing. Nellie's death, the blood in her painting, the Dacres' tension. It all felt connected, though the how and why eluded her. She thanked Mr. Vey and stepped into the evening air, the sea's roar louder now, almost accusing. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the newspaper clipping beside her canvas. The crimson streak she'd painted that afternoon seemed to pulse in the firelight, a silent challenge. She made a decision.
She'd keep watching the Dacres and Carol, noting every glance, every word. She'd dig deeper into Nellie's story, perhaps ask Tom Pengelly for more details. Her vision wasn't psychic, she told herself. It was her artist's eye catching something real, something dangerous. Tomorrow, she'd return to the inn, maybe strike up a conversation with Marjorie. For now, she stared at the canvas, the red streak a warning she couldn't ignore. Rath Hall was whispering its secrets, and Joyce was determined to listen.
Chapter 3. The Tuesday Night Club. The fire crackled in the grate of Miss Marple's drawing-room, casting a warm glow over the oak-paneled walls of her cottage in St. Mary Mead. It was a crisp September evening in 1925, and the Tuesday Night Club had gathered, as they often did, to share tales of mystery and mischief. Joyce Lempriere sat on a chintz-covered armchair, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea, her sketchbook tucked beside her. The room was a haven of quiet order, with lace doilies on the side tables and a vase of late-blooming roses scenting the air. Yet Joyce's thoughts were far from serene, tangled in the unsettling events of Rathole, Cornwall. Across from her, Raymond West, Miss Marple's nephew, lounged on a sofa, his writer's curiosity alight in his eyes. Beside him sat Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard Commissioner, his silver hair catching the firelight as he sipped his sherry. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, leaned forward in his chair, his medical skepticism tempered by a fondness for a good story. And at the heart of the circle sat Miss Marple, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, her mild blue eyes fixed on Joyce with an intensity that belied her gentle demeanor. "It's your turn, Miss Lempriere," Raymond said, teasing. "You've been quiet all evening, and I wager you've something more intriguing than my aunt's village gossip." Joyce managed a faint smile. "I'm not sure it's a story so much as a puzzle," she said. "Something happened in Rathole last week, and I can't make sense of it." She took a breath, then began, her voice steady but laced with unease. She described her arrival at the seaside inn, the trio of Dennis and Marjorie Dacre and their guest Carol, and the crimson streaks that had appeared unbidden in her painting of the inn's cobblestone path. She recounted the village whispers, Elsie's tale of blood-stained stones, Tom Pengelly's account of Nellie Tregennis's drowning, and the newspaper clipping that hinted at an unidentified man near the cove. "And then," Joyce said, her voice dropping, "I learned yesterday, just before I left Rathole, that Marjorie Dacre drowned. A boating accident, they're calling it, 2 days after I painted those streaks. I can't help but think my painting saw it coming. A vision, or something like it." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft clack of Miss Marple's needles. Raymond leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "A psychic painting? That's a new one, Joyce. Are you sure it wasn't just a trick of the light, or too much Cornish cider?" Joyce shook her head. "I checked my palette. No red paint. And it happened again, at my cottage, when I tried to sketch the sea. A single red streak, like blood, without my choosing it. I'm not for ghosts, but it felt real." Dr. Haydock cleared his throat. "The mind can play tricks, Miss Lempriere. You'd been hearing grim stories, drownings, bloodstains. Perhaps your imagination wove them into your art. A kind of autosuggestion." "Perhaps," Joyce admitted, though her tone was doubtful. "But the timing, Marjorie's death, so soon after, makes it hard to dismiss." Sir Henry set down his sherry, his eyes narrowing. "Let's stick to facts. You saw this couple, the Dacres, and their friend Carol.
You noted tension. Dennis and Carol were close. Marjorie was withdrawn. Then Marjorie drowns, and your painting seems to predict it. Have you any details on the accident?" Joyce frowned, recalling the hurried conversation with Mr. Tuttle, the innkeeper, as she packed to leave Rathhole. They were boating near the cove, the three of them. The boat capsized in rough water. Dennis and Carol swam to shore, but Marjorie didn't make it. The locals say the currents there are treacherous, but... She trailed off, her fingers tightening on her cup. "But you suspect foul play," Sir Henry finished, his voice calm but probing. "On what? Your painting, or something more tangible?" Joyce opened her sketchbook, revealing the inn's facade, the cobblestone path now grayed but faintly shadowed with red. "This," she said, pointing, "and the way Dennis and Carol acted, almost as if Marjorie wasn't there. Tom Pengelly said Dennis's charm wears thin, and Mrs. Penhale, the postmistress, thought Marjorie looked miserable. It's not evidence, I know, but it feels wrong." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her gaze sharp. "Tell me, Miss Lempriere, about those bathing suits you painted. You mentioned them drying on the balcony. Dennis's navy, Marjorie's green, Carol's red. Were they always there, in the same order?" Joyce blinked, caught off guard. I think so. I noticed them the first day, after they'd been swimming. They were still there the next morning, dripping onto the stones. Why?" Miss Marple resumed knitting, her lips pursed. "No reason, my dear. Just a detail. In St. Mary Mead, I've found small things, laundry, habits, glances, often tell a larger story." Raymond chuckled. "Aunt Jane, are you suggesting the bathing suits drowned Marjorie? You'll have us chasing laundry next." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Not quite, Raymond, but patterns matter. Miss Lempriere's painting caught something her eyes didn't fully see. Whether it's psychic or simply observant, we shan't dismiss it yet." Dr. Haydock leaned back, skeptical. "I'm with Raymond. A painting predicting murder is a stretch. More likely, Miss Lempriere, you sensed the Dacres' discord, and your art reflected it. As for the drowning, accidents happen. The sea's no respecter of persons." Sir Henry tapped his glass, his eyes narrowing. "Still, the timing's curious. And that old case, Nellie Tregennis, 1905. An unidentified man, no resolution. If there's a pattern, it's worth a look. I could make inquiries, discreetly, about the Dacres and this Carol." Joyce's heart lifted. "Would you? I'd feel better knowing it wasn't just my imagination." Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her voice soft but firm. "We mustn't rush to conclusions, but neither should we ignore Miss Lempriere's instinct. In my village, I once knew a woman who baked cakes for every church fete. Perfect cakes, until one year they tasted of bitter almonds. No one thought much of it, until her husband died. Small signs, you see, can point to great wrongs." Raymond groaned. "Aunt Jane, you're turning Joyce's painting into a cyanide cake. But I'll admit, it's a good yarn. Let's investigate, purely for the sport of it." The group agreed to pursue the matter. Sir Henry would contact his old colleagues at the Yard to check the Dacres' background and Carol's identity. Raymond offered to write to a journalist friend in Cornwall for local gossip. Dr. Haydock, though doubtful, promised to review any medical reports on Marjorie's death if available. Miss Marple said little, but Joyce felt her quiet presence like a lighthouse in a storm. As the evening wound down, Joyce lingered by the fire, her sketchbook open on her lap. The grayed-over crimson streaks seemed to whisper, urging her to trust her vision. Miss Marple approached, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "You've a keen eye, Miss Lempriere. Artists see what others miss. Don't doubt what you saw, but don't fear it either. We'll find the truth." Joyce nodded, a spark of hope igniting. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I thought I was going mad painting blood where there was none." Miss Marple smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "Madness is just clarity waiting to be understood. Good night, my dear." As Joyce walked home through St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, the stars sharp above, she felt lighter. The Tuesday night club had taken her seriously, and Miss Marple's question about the bathing suits lingered, a thread she couldn't yet pull. She resolved to send her canvas to Sir Henry for closer inspection, perhaps to reveal a detail she'd missed. For now, the mystery of Rathole was in capable hands, and Joyce, for the first time since painting those crimson streaks, believed she might find answers.
Chapter 4. Shadows of Motive. The autumn mist clung to the lanes of St. Mary Mead, softening the outlines of the hedgerows as Joyce Lempriere made her way to the village post office. It was a damp Thursday morning in September 1925, and the weight of her Rathole experience pressed heavier than the fog. Since the Tuesday night club's meeting 2 days ago, Joyce had been restless, her mind replaying the crimson streaks of her painting and Miss Marple's cryptic question about the bathing suits. The club's decision to investigate Marjorie Dacre's drowning had sparked hope, but also unease. What if her vision had indeed foretold a crime? She clutched a letter for Sir Henry Clithering, enclosing a photograph of her painting for his Scotland Yard contacts to examine, and stepped into the post office's dim interior. Mrs. Pennail, the postmistress from Rathole, was not there to greet her. Instead, a young clerk took the letter with a nod. Joyce's thoughts drifted to the seaside inn, to Dennis Dacre's easy charm and Carol's bold laughter, and to Marjorie, whose pale face seemed to haunt her sketches. As she left the post office, a motor car rumbled past and she caught a glimpse of Sir Henry inside, his expression grim. He'd promised to dig into the Dacres' background, and Joyce wondered what he'd found. Later that afternoon, the Tuesday night club reconvened at Raymond West's cottage, a modern affair with books strewn across every surface. The fire was less cheerful than Miss Marple's, but the group's energy was sharp. Raymond sprawled in an armchair, scribbling notes, while Dr. Haydock sipped tea, his skepticism undimmed. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting a steady rhythm, and Sir Henry stood by the mantel, a sheaf of papers in hand. "I've had some luck," Sir Henry began, his voice measured. "My old colleagues at the Yard pulled records on Dennis Dacre. He's no stranger to financial trouble, bad investments, gambling debts, the lot. But here's the kicker. Marjorie had a life insurance policy taken out last year worth £10,000. Dennis is the sole beneficiary." Joyce's breath caught. £10,000? That's a fortune. Raymond whistled. "Motive enough for murder, I'd say. Paint a few red streaks, and you've got a proper thriller." Dr. Haydock frowned. "Let's not leap to conclusions. People take out insurance all the time, and boating accidents aren't uncommon in Cornwall's waters." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Indeed, Dr. Haydock, but in St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who insured his wife's jewelry just before it vanished. Coincidences are rarely so tidy." Intent. Sir Henry nodded. "There's more. Dennis was seen in London last spring with a woman matching Carol's description. Auburn hair, flashy dresser. No name, but they were thick as thieves at a gambling club. If Carol's involved, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment affair." Joyce leaned forward, her heart racing.
I saw them in Rathhole, Dennis and Carol, on the beach. They were laughing, splashing each other, while Marjorie sat alone. It felt deliberate, like they were taunting her. Miss Marple tilted her head. Taunting, you say? That's interesting. In my village, I once saw a young wife ignored by her husband at a dance. Everyone thought her shy, but she was heartbroken. Heartbreak can make one careless, near water, perhaps. Raymond grinned. And Jane, you're spinning village yarns again. But Joyce, tell us more about that beach scene. Anything odd besides the flirting? Joyce closed her eyes, picturing the pebbled shore. Marjorie walked off alone toward a rocky outcrop. I thought she might be upset, but when she came back, she looked calm, almost resigned. Dennis barely noticed her return, and Carol kept glancing at Marjorie like she was sizing her up. Sir Henry jotted a note. The boating accident, any details from the inquest? Joyce shook her head. Only what Mr. Tuttle told me. The boat capsized near the cove, in rough water. Dennis and Carol swam to shore, but Marjorie was pulled under. No witnesses, except the two of them. Dr. Haydock raised an eyebrow. Convenient, but without evidence, it's just a tragic accident. Miss Marple set her knitting down. Perhaps, doctor, but Miss Lempriere's painting suggests she saw something her conscious mind didn't grasp. Those crimson streaks, might they symbolize something other than blood? A red bathing suit, perhaps, or a cloth used to mislead? Joyce's eyes widened. The bathing suits! You asked about them before. They were always on the balcony, navy, green, red, but I don't recall seeing the red one after the drowning. Could that mean something? Miss Marple smiled faintly. It might, my dear. Small details often do. In St. Mary Mead, a missing scarf solved a theft. We mustn't overlook what's absent. Sir Henry rubbed his chin. I'll have the yard check if anything was recovered from the boat or the cove. Meanwhile, Joyce, can you get that painting to me? A photograph's good, but the original might show something. Joyce nodded. It's at my studio in London. I'll fetch it tomorrow. Raymond clapped his hands. This is turning into a proper case. And Jane, you're practically a detective. What's next? Dusting the canvas for fingerprints? Miss Marple chuckled. Hardly, Raymond, but I'd like to know more about Carol. A woman who arrives unannounced, cozying up to a married man, often has her own story of being. The meeting adjourned with a plan. Sir Henry would pursue Carol's identity through his contacts, Joyce would deliver the painting, and Raymond would write to his journalist friend for any unreported details from Rathhole. Dr. Haydock, still dubious, agreed to look into drowning cases for patterns, if only to humor the group. Joyce returned to her lodgings, a small room above the village bakery, her mind buzzing. The insurance policy, Carol's connection to Dennis, Miss Marple's focus on the bathing suits, it all pointed to a plot, but the pieces didn't yet fit. She lit a lamp and opened her sketchbook, flipping to a new page. She tried to draw the cove from memory, its jagged rocks and churning waves, but her pencil traced a different shape, a shadow, vague but human, holding a cloth that dripped red. She gasped, dropping the pencil. It was the same figure from her dream in Rathhole, now appearing in her waking art. Determined to stay grounded, she walked to the bakery below, where Mrs. Cuttle, the baker's wife, was kneading dough for the morning's bread. "You're up late, Miss Lempriere. Something troubling you?" Mrs. Cuttle said, her flour-dusted hands deft. Joyce hesitated, then shared a sliver of her story. Not the painting, but the Dacre's tension and Marjorie's death. Mrs. Cuttle's eyes narrowed. "Sounds like that couple I read about in the papers. Wife drowned, husband all tears but quick to move on. Men like that, they've got secrets. Had a cousin once, married a charmer who lost his first wife in a fall. Turned out he helped her along." Joyce's stomach twisted. "You think Dennis planned it?" Mrs. Cuttle shrugged. "I'm no sleuth, but greed makes folk do wicked things. You be careful poking into it." Back in her room, Joyce stared at the sketch of the shadowed figure. Was it Dennis? Carol? Or someone else, tied to Nellie Tregennis's death years ago? The crimson cloth felt like a clue, but its meaning eluded her. She thought of Miss Marple's words. The painting might symbolize something her eyes hadn't fully seen. Perhaps the red wasn't blood, but a deception. A prop in a crime? She resolved to act. Tomorrow, she'd retrieve the painting and send it to Sir Henry. She'd write to Tom Pengelly, the fisherman, asking if he'd seen anything odd the day of the drowning, a red cloth perhaps, or Carol's bathing suit. For now, she blew out the lamp, the sketchbook open beside her bed. The mystery was deepening, and Joyce felt herself drawn into its current, guided by Miss Marple's quiet wisdom and her own relentless vision.
Chapter 5. The Clue in the Canvas. The London studio of Joyce Lempriere was a cluttered haven of creativity, its walls lined with half-finished canvases and shelves brimming with paint tubes and brushes. On this gray Saturday morning in September 1925, the air smelled of turpentine and damp plaster, and a weak light filtered through the skylight, illuminating the painting that had haunted Joyce since Rathhole, the seaside inn, its cobblestone path faintly shadowed with the crimson streaks she'd tried to erase. She stood before it, her hands on her hips, her mind churning with the Tuesday Night Club's recent discoveries, Dennis Dacre's deaths, the insurance policy on Marjorie's life, and Carol's suspicious connection to him. The painting, now sent to Sir Henry Clithering for examination, had been returned yesterday with a note. "Bring it to St. Mary Mead. I'd like a look myself. J. Marple." Joyce glanced at the clock. Miss Marple was due any moment, an unexpected but welcome visitor. The old lady's question about the bathing suits, navy, green, and red, had lodged in Joyce's mind, as had her suggestion that the crimson streaks might not be blood, but a symbol of something else. Joyce had spent the night poring over her sketches, and one detail had leapt out. A shadow in the background of her painting, vague but distinct, shaped like a figure holding a red-stained cloth. It echoed the figure from her dream in Rathhole and her recent sketch in St. Mary Mead, and she couldn't shake the feeling it was a clue her subconscious had captured. A soft knock broke her reverie. Joyce opened the door to find Miss Marple, her shawl neatly pinned, a small umbrella tucked under her arm, despite the dry weather. Her blue eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity as she stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the studio before settling on the painting. "Goodness, Miss Lempriere, what a lively space! All these colors, it's like walking into a story." She approached the canvas, her head tilted. "Now, this is the painting that caused such a stir." Joyce nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I tried to cover the red streaks, but you can still see them, like a ghost under the gray. And there, behind the balcony, do you see that shadow? I didn't notice it at first, but it's there, holding something red." Miss Marple leaned closer, her knitting bag resting on a nearby stool. "Indeed, a figure, quite distinct, though blurred. And the cloth, almost like a scarf, or a rag, wouldn't you say? In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a photograph at a fete, taken by a vicar's wife. Everyone thought it showed a happy picnic, but there, in the corner, was a shadow, a man slipping a watch from a lady's bag. No one noticed until the theft was discovered." Joyce's pulse quickened. "You think this shadow is real? Something I saw but didn't register?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Your artist's eye, my dear, is sharper than you know. You painted what you saw, even if you didn't understand it. Tell me, when you were in Rathhole, did you ever see Dennis or Carol with a red cloth, perhaps a scarf, or even that bathing suit?" Joyce frowned, sifting through her memories. "Not a cloth exactly. Carol's red bathing suit was on the balcony most days, but I don't recall seeing it after Marjorie's drowning. Dennis had a red handkerchief once at breakfast, tucked in his pocket. I thought it was garish for him." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Garish, yes. Men like Dennis often choose such things to be noticed, but a handkerchief can hide many sins. In my village, a young man used one to clean a knife after a poaching incident. No one thought twice until the gamekeeper's dog sniffed it out. Joyce shivered, the image of the shadowed figure sharpening in her mind. You think Dennis used a cloth to, what, stage something? Perhaps Miss Lempriere, Miss Marple said, her tone measured. Or perhaps Carol. We mustn't assume. Let's look closer. She gestured to the painting, her finger tracing the shadow's outline. The figure stands near the inn's corner, yes? As if watching the path. Could it be someone saw the Dacres that day, before the boating accident? Joyce's mind raced back to Rathole, the cobblestone path, the balcony, the trio's tense dynamic. There were always people around, fishermen, tourists, but I didn't notice anyone lurking. I was too focused on the Dacres and Carol. Miss Marple nodded, setting her knitting bag down and pulling out a small magnifying glass. May I? She asked, and Joyce nodded, intrigued. The old lady examined the canvas, her movements deliberate. The shadow's angle suggests late afternoon light, and the cloth, it's not just red, but textured, almost crumpled, like something used in a hurry. Joyce's heart skipped. Used for what? To fake blood, like in my vision? Miss Marple straightened, her expression thoughtful. Possibly. Or to conceal something else. A mark, a stain, a weapon. In St. Mary Mead, a maid once hid a stolen brooch in a folded cloth. Small things, Miss Lempriere, hide big secrets. Before Joyce could respond, a telegram arrived, delivered by a breathless boy from the post office. It was from Henry, addressed to both of them. Found Carol in London records, alias Clara Morton, known associate of Dennis Dacre, linked to gambling debts. No criminal record, but suspected in insurance fraud case 1923. Suggests motive. Meet tonight. Joyce read it aloud, her hands trembling. Insurance fraud. That fits with the policy on Marjorie. They planned it together, Dennis and Carol. Miss Marple tucked the magnifying glass away. It's possible, my dear, but we need more than suspicion. The painting, this shadow, it's a thread we must pull. I suggest we take this to Sir Henry tonight. He'll want to see it, and perhaps Raymond's journalist friend has found something from Rathole. Joyce agreed, and after Miss Marple left for a train back to St. Mary Mead, Joyce packed the painting carefully, its canvas heavy with secrets. She caught a late train herself, arriving at Raymond's Trottage by dusk. The Tuesday night club was already assembled, the air thick with anticipation. Raymond waved a letter from his journalist friend, his eyes bright. News from Cornwall, he announced. A fisherman, Tom Pengelly, Joyce's contact, says he saw Carol near the cove the morning of the drowning carrying a red bundle. Thought it was laundry, but it was gone by noon. Sir Henry's brow furrowed. A red bundle matches the cloth in Joyce's painting, and with Carol's history, Clara Morton no less, it's looking less like an accident. Dr. Haydock, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. A bundle proves nothing. Could have been a towel, a scarf. You're building a castle on sand. Miss Marple, now seated with her knitting, looked up. Sand can hide footprints, Doctor. In my village, a boy lost a red kite string, and it turned up in a thief's pocket. Small things, again. Miss Lempriere's painting is telling us to look where others didn't. Joyce set the canvas on a table, the shadow figure stark under the lamplight. This shadow, she said, pointing. Miss Marple noticed it's holding a crumpled cloth. I think it's what I saw. Maybe Carol, maybe Dennis hiding something that day. Sir Henry examined the painting, his expression grim. I'll have the yard search the cove again. If that cloth is Carol's bathing suit or Dennis's handkerchief, It could be evidence. Joyce, any other details from Rathhole you've recalled? Joyce hesitated and said, only that Carol always seemed to watch Marjorie, like she was waiting for something. And Dennis, he laughed too easily, but his eyes were cold when he looked at his wife. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Cold eyes, yes. I've seen that in St. Mary Mead, a husband who smiled at his wife but planned her ruin. We must find Carol, I think. Her story will unravel this. The club agreed to focus on tracking Carol, now Clara Morton, while Sir Henry pursued the physical evidence. Joyce felt a surge of purpose, her painting no longer a mystery but a guide. As the meeting ended, she lingered by the canvas, the shadow figure seeming to move in the flickering light. She resolved to write to Tom Pengelly again, asking about that red bundle, and to sketch the cove from memory, hoping to coax out more details. For now, the painting was her ally, its shadowed clue pointing toward a truth she was determined to uncover.
Chapter 6. The Tides of Truth. The Bristol docks shimmered under a thin September drizzle, the tang of salt and tar heavy in the air. Joyce Lempriere stood beneath a gas lamp, her coat damp and her nerves taut, as she waited for Raymond West outside a narrow, soot-streaked boarding house. It was Monday, September 15, 1925, and the Tuesday Night Club's investigation into Marjorie Dacre's death had led them here, to a woman now known as Clara Morton, Carol, the auburn-haired stranger from Rathhole. Sir Henry Clithering's contacts had tracked her to this address, a place where dock workers and transient sailors lodged, far from the seaside inn's quaint charm. Joyce clutched her sketchbook, its pages now filled with the shadowed figure and red cloth from her painting, a constant reminder of the mystery that had consumed her. Raymond emerged from the fog, his trilby tilted against the rain. "She's inside," he said, his voice low. "Room 12, top floor. Sir Henry's waiting at the pub across the street. He thinks we'll get more out of her without a yardman looming. Ready?" Joyce nodded, though her stomach nodded. The telegram from Sir Henry, revealing Carol's alias and her link to Dennis Dacre's gambling debts, had confirmed their suspicions of a crime planned. Miss Marple's focus on the red cloth, possibly Carol's bathing suit or Dennis's handkerchief, had sharpened their purpose. Joyce's painting, with its shadowed figure, felt like a map to the truth, and she was determined to follow it. They climbed the boarding house's creaking stairs, the air thick with mildew and cheap tobacco. At room 12, Joyce knocked, her heart pounding. The door opened to reveal Carol, her auburn hair duller in the dim light, her silk scarf replaced by a plain shawl. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "You," she said, recognizing Joyce from Rathhole. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," Joyce said, her voice steady, despite her nerves, "about Marjorie Dacre and what happened at the Cove." Carol's tight lips, but she stepped aside, letting them into a cramped room with a single chair and a sagging bed. "I've nothing to hide," she said, crossing her arms. "It was an accident. The boat capsized. Dennis and I tried to save her." Raymond leaned against the doorframe, his tone casual but probing. "An accident, Clara? Or should I say Clara Morton? Funny how you showed up in Rathhole just when Marjorie's insurance policy was ripe for claiming." Carol flinched, her composure cracking. "You've been digging, haven't you?" "Yes, I'm Clara. So what? Dennis and I are old friends. I was visiting, that's all." Joyce opened her sketchbook, showing the shadowed figure with the red cloth. "I painted this in Rathhole before Marjorie died. This figure, holding something red like your bathing suit. Tom Pengelly saw you with a red bundle that morning. Care to explain?" Carol's gaze darted to the sketch, her face paling. "You're mad. It's just a drawing. I had laundry that day. Towels, clothes, nothing sinister." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Laundry that vanished by noon? Convenient. And Dennis's debts. £10,000 from Marjorie's insurance policy would clear them nicely. You two were seen together in London, Carol. Planning something?" Carol sat heavily on the bed, her hands twisting the shawl. "You think we killed her? That's absurd. The boat tipped in a swell. Marjorie couldn't swim well. She panicked. Dennis tried to reach her, but the current was too strong." Her voice wavered, but her eyes were defiant. Joyce pressed on. "And the red cloth? My painting showed it before the drowning. Was it your bathing suit?
Used to state a scene? To make it look like an accident? Carol's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I had a red bathing suit. It got lost in the wash after we swam. Ask the innkeeper. Raymond exchanged a glance with Joyce. We will. But here's the thing, Clara. You and Dennis were close. Too close. Marjorie was in the way. And that insurance policy smells like motive. Carol stood, her voice rising. I won't be accused like this. I cared for Dennis, yes, but I didn't hurt Marjorie. It was an accident. She paused, her eyes glistening. Dennis was devastated. He loved her, in his way. Joyce's heart sank. Carol's words sounded rehearsed, but a flicker of doubt crept in. Was she protecting Dennis or herself? Before Joyce could ask more, her pocket buzzed, a prearranged signal from Sir Henry, who'd arranged a telephone call with Miss Marple to join the discussion. They excused themselves and hurried to the pub, where a phone waited. Miss Marple's voice crackled through the line, calm but incisive. Miss Lempriere, Mr. West, what did Carol say? Joyce recounted the confrontation, Carol's denial, the lost bathing suit, the claim of an accident. She seemed shaken when I showed her the sketch, but she insists the red bundle was just laundry. Miss Marple's tone was thoughtful. Laundry, indeed. In St. Mary Mead, a woman once claimed a stained apron was just laundry, until we found it hid a stolen brooch. Carol's bathing suit interests me. You said it was missing after the drowning, yes? And Tom Pengelly saw a red bundle that morning. Did Carol mention where they swam before the boating trip? Joyce frowned, recalling the beach. They swam near the cove, all three of them. Marjorie went off alone briefly, but they were together before the boat trip. Miss Marple's needles clicked faintly in the background. I see. And the boat? Where was it moored? Near the inn or farther out? Raymond chimed in. The innkeeper said it was a small rowboat, moored by the cove. Dennis rented it for the day. There was a pause, then Miss Marple said, I wonder if the red cloth was used to distract. In my village, a man once waved a red scarf to lure a dog from danger, only to trap it. If Dennis or Carol used the bathing suit to stage a scene, say a fake injury on the shore, it might have drawn attention from the boat's capsizing. Joyce's breath caught. You think they faked bloodstains? That's what my painting showed, blood on the path. Possibly, Miss Marple said, or it hid something else, a tool, perhaps, to tamper with the boat. Sir Henry, standing nearby, nodded. I'll wire the yard and I'll ask for Dennis's past, any other accidents tied to him. Joyce felt a surge of clarity. Her painting's shadow, Carol's red bundle, Miss Marple's theory of a staged distraction, it all pointed to a deliberate act. She resolved to sketch the cove again, focusing on the boat's mooring, and to write to Tom Pengelly for any overlooked details. For now, the club's plan to find Carol and investigate Dennis offered a lifeline, pulling her closer to the truth behind Marjorie's death and her own unsettling vision.
Chapter 7. Miss Marple's Triumph. The lamplight in Miss Marple's drawing room cast a golden glow over the Tuesday night club, gathered for what promised to be their final meeting on the rat hole mystery. It was a chilly Tuesday evening, September 23, 1925, and the air in St. Mary Mead carried the crisp promise of autumn. Joyce Lempriere sat near the fire, her sketchbook closed for the first time in weeks, its shadowed figure and crimson streaks now a solved puzzle, or so she hoped. Raymond West lounged by the window, his notebook filled with scribbled theories, while Sir Henry Clithering stood by the mantel, a telegram in hand. Dr. Haydock, his skepticism softened by recent revelations, sipped tea, and Miss Marple, knitting as always, presided over the room with her quiet, unyielding focus. Joyce's heart raced as Sir Henry cleared his throat. "We've had a breakthrough," he said, his voice steady. "My contacts at the yard found Clara Morton, Carol, in a Bristol flat yesterday. She's talking, and it's damning. They also recovered a red bathing suit from the Seaside End's attic, hidden in a laundry sack. It's hers, stained with dye, not blood." Joyce's breath caught. "Dye? Then my painting, the crimson streaks, weren't blood?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Not blood, my dear, but a clever ruse. In St. Mary Mead, a farmer once used berry juice to fake an injury, distracting from a stolen calf. I suspected your crimson streaks were symbolic,
a deception you saw but didn't understand. Sir Henry nodded. Clara's confession fills the gaps. She and Dennis Dacre planned to stage an accident. Dennis's debts were crushing. £10,000 from Marjorie's insurance was their way out. They used the red bathing suit, soaked in dye, to create a false bloodstain on the cove's shore, suggesting she'd been hurt there before the boat trip. It drew attention from the real crime. Raymond leaned forward, eyes wide. So the boat capsizing wasn't an accident? Exactly, Sir Henry said. The yard examined the boat. Its hull had been tampered with. A small hole drilled to let water in slowly. Dennis and Clara swam to safety, knowing Marjorie couldn't. The bloodstain was meant to confuse any witnesses, making it seem she'd been hurt on land. Joyce's mind reeled, her painting shadow figure coming into focus. The figure I painted holding the red cloth, that was Clara, wasn't it? Setting up the dye? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright. Indeed, Miss Lempraire. Your artist's eye caught her, even if your mind didn't know it. The shadow was Clara, preparing the deception near the inn. You saw her, perhaps fleetingly, and your brush recorded it. Dr. Haydock set down his tea, his skepticism gone. I'll be damned. I thought it was all coincidence. Drownings happen. But this, it's cold-blooded. Sir Henry continued. Clara's turned on Dennis, claiming he coerced her. She says she only helped with the dye, not the murder itself. But the yard found more. Dennis had a first wife, died in a fall in 1920, with another insurance payout. The pattern's clear. Joyce shivered, recalling Mrs. Cuddle's story of a cousin's suspicious husband. He's done this before. Marjorie was just another mark. Miss Marple's needles paused. Greed, my dear, is a terrible master. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a shopkeeper who overinsured his stock before a fire. The pattern was the same. Money over morals. Dennis's charm hid a ruthless heart, and Clara, I suspect, was both accomplice and pawn. Raymond grinned, closing his notebook. Aunt Jane, you've outdone yourself. Joyce's painting was the key, and you saw it all along. How do you do it? Miss Marple's smile was modest. I merely observe, Raymond. Village life teaches you patterns. Jealousy, betrayal, greed. Joyce's painting was like a village gossip's tale, full of truths, if you know where to look. Sir Henry folded the telegram. Dennis is in custody, charged with murder. The bathing suit and boat evidence are enough to convict, and Clara's testimony seals it. The yard's closing the case, but Joyce, your vision started it all. Joyce flushed, a mix of relief and awe washing over her. I thought I was going mad, painting blood where there was none, but it wasn't blood. It was dye, a lie I saw through my canvas. Miss Marple set down her knitting, her voice gentle but firm. Your gift, Miss Lempraire, is seeing what others miss. In my village, a girl once drew a flower where a weed stood, and it showed her heart's hope. Your painting showed a crime's truth. Never doubt it. The group raised their teacups in a toast, Raymond's voice ringing out. To Miss Marple, who turns knitting into sleuthing, and to Joyce, whose brush caught a killer. Laughter filled the room, warm and final, as the fire crackled. Joyce felt the weight of Rat Hole lift, the crimson streaks no longer a haunting, but a triumph. She glanced at her sketchbook, its pages now a record of justice, not fear. The mystery was solved. Dennis's greed, Clara's complicity, the staged bloodstain, all unraveled by her painting and Miss Marple's quiet brilliance. As the group dispersed, Joyce lingered, helping Miss Marple tidy the tea tray. I don't know how to thank you, she said. I was so afraid my vision meant something supernatural. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. No spirits, my dear, just human nature. In my village, we solve mysteries with observation and a touch of heart.
You've both in spades." Joyce walked home through St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes, the stars bright above. The seaside inn, the cove, the shadowed figure, they were no longer threats, but memories, neatly tied like Miss Marple's knitting. She decided to paint again, not the inn, but the sea itself, free of crimson strains. Marjorie's death was avenged, Dennis's crimes exposed, and Rathole's secrets lay bare. The canvas of her mind was clear, and Joyce, for the first time in weeks, felt at peace.